Robin Koning. I'm the director of the Australian Lonergan Centre, but I'm not chairing this meeting in that role. Normally, Geoff, who is our speaker, chairs these special presentations, but I thought he could have done both, chaired and presented, but he opted out of that option, so I'm chairing it. And I'm a Jesuit priest. I don't do a lot of academic stuff at the moment, but I'm vocations director for the Jesuits for Australia and New Zealand. Geoff is currently the assistant principal at one of our high schools here in Australia, in Victoria, assistant principal for faith and identity at St. Patrick's College in Ballarat in Victoria. He's also the current holder of the Peter Faber Travelling Fellowship for Lonergan Studies, a fellowship that provides some funding for an emerging Australian Lonergan scholar, and pursuing his doctoral studies at the University of Notre Dame in Australia. He's a long-standing member of the St. Patrick's community staff, or St. Patrick's community, as a staff member and as a parent. He also joins in regularly and values the meetings of the Melbourne Lonergan Circle. He holds a Bachelor of Arts, a Graduate Diploma of Education, a Master of Arts in Theological Studies, and a Master of Philosophy. But he feels he hasn't done enough studies, so now he's doing his doctorate. And we've already, the last part of the bio that he sent me is we just talked about, that Geoff and his wife Tess have entered the world of grandparents with the arrival of Lucia Rose, adding to the great joy of family life for them. So not sure if Lucia will make an appearance on this video. So Geoff's going to speak to us on the topic of thoughts on the emergence of a final relevant question to guide educating in friendship. He'll present for about 40 minutes, then we'll have 30 minutes for questions and discussion. So I hand over to you, Geoff.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Robin. And thank you, everyone, for certainly the effort in attending and sharing in this conversation. And I'm not known for my technical capacity, but there are a few slides that I'm hoping will appear shortly. Yes, I'm probably going to end up somewhere near 40 years in education with our youngest daughter in grade 4, so there's still the mortgage to pay. And but one of the things I've noticed is certainly over recent years, in discussing education in some form of friendship, is the changing horizons of our students, and that was brought very much to the forefront in our Ash Wednesday liturgies here, where one of our Year 7 students, so the new to St. Pat's in the beginning, a 12, 13-year-old, and we went through the ritual of the ashes. And I'm not sure of his background, but he went up to his homeroom teacher afterwards, a little bit distressed, and pointed to his forehead and asked his teacher, whose ashes are these? And so if you just try to imagine that poor student's world for a little while, about these crazy people that he joined, putting the ashes of deceased people on his forehead, he was sorted out in due time. But, that assumed knowledge about our rituals and our practices, or even just the general story of Christianity, increasingly we can't take for granted. And so friendship starts from a different point of view, a different encounter of very horizons that are unique to this contemporary moment. So before I start, I'd certainly like to thank Father Peter Beer for introducing me to Bernard Lonergan many years ago, and as Robin indicated, the trustees of the Peter Faber Fellowship, the colleagues of the Melbourne Lonergan Circle, all the colleagues and students and families of St. Pat's College over the last many years, and of course my family, which is the first school. But so I've been trying to put some of my leadership colleagues and to other staff as well, a bit of a first challenge. And that is, imagine that you're on a panel to select a Catholic school leader, and you're only permitted to ask one question on which a decision is to be made. And I'm going to discuss in a little while why I think it's important to focus on a final relevant question when it comes to education, the way that it orders and relates in this quite diverse society that we've got. But I don't know, maybe if you've got a suggestion for what that question might be, you might stick it in the chat. But this proposal will go forward with the dramatic curtain there. That's just me trying to distract you from something. But this is what I believe, or I'm proposing as a final relevant question to that potential Catholic leader. To what extent do they understand that question? The way questions unfold in Lonergan's account, the way that they anticipate that as a final relevant question, and then all the choices and actions and the cohesion and the unity and the friendship that flows out of commitment to that question. So, as a bit of an overview, 5 parts, just a few foundational thoughts just on 4 terms that I'd like to share the way that I'm going to use them, and then looking at the final relevant question as an organising principle, and then how, in terms of staff formation, the concept of mapping the final relevant question, how do we get to it, and how do you engage the horizon of colleagues in a way that is invitational and friendly, inviting them into that final relevant question. Then a way that all this can be used in a concrete term, which will be a parent, teacher and student interview to try and have a sense of what's at stake there, and just some final comments. So we'll make a start. So just having a look at these 4 foundational concepts that much, the way I understand these, much of what follows emerges from. So Lonergan's account of self-appropriation and just how important that is, the idea of knowing one's knowing, and there's a rock that one may build upon. And of course, to affirm oneself as a knower, a chooser, an actor and a lover is to avoid being a victim in this world. I set out the way that is an encounter and friendship with reality, and a friendship with this universe that God has given to us as a loving gift. So, as it's set out, I think everyone here is quite familiar with this. So that important role of questions, the data of one's senses and the data of oneself, that you ask the question, what is it? And come to some understanding and explain that. The question, is it really so? And the establishment of those, the fulfilling conditions that leads one to say yes or no, or maybe I need to do a bit more work. And then the question, so what? And that leads to a decision to live a certain way. And I think there is certainly an element, I believe, that there's cultural influences to truncate this whole process at the level of understanding. And the question to ask another person now, well, is that really so? Too often is met by, well, that's my opinion, and you can't question that. That's an offence to me. I've got my reality, and I choose that word. But what they're really saying is, I've got my understanding, but they mistake it for reality and shy away from the unfolding and of the important question of, well, is it really so? But of course, that upward vector in education, try to inspire that disinterested desire to know, to set aside that self-interest and encounter the world as it truly is. But there is also the great gift of trust in another, and that we come to know so much by judging the trustworthiness of another person and sharing in their understanding, and then having the joy of experiencing the world as they experience it, which hopefully is full of friendship and full of joy. And so I would regard that, if I've got the word right, as a fractal, a repeating fractal, that sequence of experience sublating through to decision is repeated over and over again. And I won't spend too much time on this, but down the bottom there, there's experience, understanding, and judging. And if we move up, from knowing, and the intention there is to know the real and that life is meaningful, well, then comes the question, well, so what will I do? And we enter into the horizon of choosing, that we're capable and given the gift of being able to choose values over self-satisfaction. And in that right column, to affirm ourselves, who I truly am, is a chooser. That's the notion of the human subject. And of course, then there's the big gap between making the choice to do my homework and then what I actually do. And so to close an element or a view of the existential gap there, to create a beautiful life and to shape the beauty of creation by having the courage to be an actor that can see through all the challenges to bring about and act consistently with the values that are chosen and those values that are known. And in that final sequence, there's that idea of that total gift of oneself as a knower, a chooser, and an actor, to give myself as a gift to another person and to the other. And so that I come to affirm myself empirically also as a lover. And so taking that to propose education as a proposal into reality at the fourth level of decision, but also that level of commitment. And that the way I frame, what happens in a moment of education is that there is in terms of school education, that there is a curriculum that has the commitments of a heritage, a commitment to what is real, to what is good and what is beautiful. And the teacher shares in those commitments, and then through their pedagogy and their wise practice, proposes those commitments to their students. And the student shares in that commitment. And that commitment is to human flourishing. And so, in a common sense sort of way, the student will say, what you've proposed to me, yeah, I'll have a piece of that. I'll live out of that commitment. And that can happen in a whole variety of ways, in little small moments in a woodwork room, or in a large, in an RE class that's explicitly addressing the questions of ultimate meaning and final value. And so the movement towards that education moment, the probability increases if the teacher is self-appropriated. Okay, and so that education moment becomes, in cooperating with oneself, that we come to know as a gift, and we get to experience then this entire friendly universe as a gift. We anticipate the responsible action that comes in society that is in conformity with encountering the other as a gift, and that this whole universe is a gift of God's wise and loving plan. And so that the school environment that the student grows in, matures in, that they take that to their society, and then in seeking to conform that society, we direct history in and through beautiful friendships that conform to what is real, good and just, and that hopefully all things that are real, good and just find a home in our schools, our communities, and yes. And so that anything that is authentic, because it is then understood as part of cooperating with God's wise and loving plan, anything that is authentic in educating is properly understood as a distinction of love. And that's why I think we're drawn to education and why we persist to it. And in the wake of the Bondi terror and the horror there, one of the first refrains of trying to understand was to say we need to expect more of our education. Education will play an important part of the solution here. We go to education because I believe that we experience it as such a profound encounter with joy, but also the suffering and healing. And so move on to the second term, a bit quicker here. Thank you. Democracy is often a noun in need of an adjective. Athenian democracy, Australian democracy, European, North American democracy. The idea I'm trying to move here is an educated democracy. And that is, again, the empirical authority, people power, authority, and a democracy of one's own desire for knowledge of the real and good, and the democratic or the societal structures that are created, the institutions, the ways of cooperating, when that desire for the real and good is shared and comes to that highest level of consciousness, the commitment to be that person and the courage to do so. The third of the terms, friendship. There is one school of thought that equates or lines up friendship with charity. And so I think it's legitimate to speak of it as, in the fullness, as a theological virtue. Okay, as in faith, hope, and charity with that friendship. And that as friends come to that mutual knowledge born of love, quoting here that faith and hope fade away, but that identification fully with the other, is that trust and hope may be seen in one way that falls away because we can say to our friend, I know that you will be there for me because you are a friend. I don't have to trust in that. I don't have to hope in that, but I know that because of the deep and profound mutual self-giving in friendship. And then keeping the word itself, love. I follow Tony Kelly, Australian Redemptorist here, who in one of his little books, in talking about all the beliefs of the Catholic faith being distinctions of love, and that he keeps capital L love as the source of love, and all the different types of love he gives a lowercase l. And so I think that orders in shifting, instead of saying faith, hope, and love, it allows that love itself to be immediately associated with the beautiful revelation that God is love and God is Trinitarian. And so that is a bit rushed, I'm sorry. I'm keeping an eye on the time. But we'll move on to the second point, and that is, in Lonergan's structure, the final relevant question, the movement from before I say yes or no to anything, what is the question that orders all the other questions? And so I'd like to just have a quick discussion about that in terms of organising education in friendship for a democracy. So we could list all the important things that we think should happen in education, as the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership have done. Okay, and there's a list of 7 things, but I would, for a Lonergan audience, you could already see in the first one, no students, there's so many assumptions in there and what it is to learn. And so, these terms could be they're in danger of a static conceptualism if we don't engage them with the reality of our own unfolding consciousness. Or we could end up, they could be a source of competition and division in education if people define those words differently. And they don't give any sense of order there. They're just another list. A simpler way of looking at it is that schools often, among many different categories of what schools offer, teaching and learning and the well-being element and all the extracurricular activities all add up to school life. Without a higher viewpoint, if we just put them in that image of the equation there, it's too easy to see them as different elements of school life and quite possibly in competition. And so that the sporting program, which is so important for an all-boys school, may be seen as being in competition with getting students into class and all the activities there that are based in the curriculum and assessment. And they need to be strong characters or whatever. We're too soft on them in one version of well-being. And so all the different permutations that without the final relevant question, without the higher viewpoint, we're just institutionalizing conflict by setting these constitutive elements of education against each other. But if we just do the slight refrain there, and if leaders and educators in a school community share a highest commitment that is worthy of the human person, worthy of our students, then teaching and learning and well-being and extracurricular and finance and risk and all those other elements can be seen as distinctions of that highest value rather than being in competition. So the proposal there is that the final relevant question in itself, whether we agree on what it is, but the introduction of a final relevant question that comes from Lonergan's structure of consciousness has the capacity to relate all the worthy commitments of a school as distinctions of that highest value rather than competitors in a more political and diminishing horizon. And what it can also do is that the final relevant question can itself be the criteria to judge between competing goods within a school, which addresses a very important question for us, the crowded curriculum and all the different competing philosophies that are always trying to make their way in a school environment. So the idea here, I think the point I'm trying to make is just as faith, hope and charity are distinctions of love, and love being that higher viewpoint, the concrete reality and commitment to a final relevant question, if it's truly worthy of human dignity and human society, then it has the capacity to mark all the different things a school can do and the diversity in a society as distinctions of that higher value rather than mere competitors. So the third part, which is mapping the relevant question, how to get there. And this is where Lonergan I have found to be a source of wonderful and workable proposals. So if we go to the idea of mapping, and I've got it just here, this late last year, thanks to my son-in-law, a first-year teacher, for bringing this, Bradley, for bringing this to my attention. I should have seen it, but I didn't. Pope Leo, on the anniversary, the 60th anniversary of the Conciliar Declaration at Vatican II on education, he has written about education at the start of his pontificate with the heading, with the title, Drawing New Maps of Hope. And so I'm trying to set out with the image of a map here as well, how we approach, discuss, and practically engage with the final relevant question. And so we begin with latitudes, and using Lonergan's 4 realms of meaning, and trying to put them in a bit of teacher speak with 4 Ps, but the latitude of common, or the realm of common sense, is that the teacher, if we focus on teacher formation here, the teacher asks the question, what do I need to be fulfilled or feel fulfilled at the end of the day? And that's an important personal question. And so in the common sense realm, they're the center, the protagonist in that story. And if that question can be successfully answered, and out of the peace that brings, and the confidence of thinking, oh, well, I can get through a day successfully, they can be invited into the latitude of the pedagogue, which is excellence, and started to understand what educating actually is in and of itself. And which is what I set out in my education moment at the level of commitment. But certainly to raise this as a question to the teacher as they unfold their fuller engagement with educating and what is truly at stake. And so we've got this notion of sublation, which is that the questions of the protagonist remain, but once that confidence, grows in the teacher, then I believe the spontaneous question, and this is from my own experience in the school, the spontaneous question of, well, what's really going on in the classroom, and wanting to give that explanation and share that explanation with colleagues, and to have it guide one's practice for the excellence of what happens in class and the excellence of the education proposed to students. We're at a higher level. We sublate to a higher level. And we still want to feel good at the end of the day, but we also want to be outstanding practitioners. And what's the next level of sublation is that there are competing pedagogies. So how can the teacher come to know and choose what is truly best for their students? And that's the realm of the philosopher. And this is where Lonergan's account of self-appropriation is simply an outstanding engagement for any teacher. And insight is such a wonderful invitation, self-appropriation itself, to understand oneself as a knower, and then have the authority, the people power, the democracy, to then again choose between different pedagogies and find which ones are a distinction of the authentic education moment and which ones are counter positions. And to be part of that again enriches what it is to be a protagonist. The joy that is felt with the coffee no doubt, at the end of the day will just continue to be enriched as the years go by. And then with the latitude of the passionate, what am I willing to suffer for? What am I willing to endure for the sake of that highest commitment? And how is it that my suffering is transformed? And that question I take up in what I believe to be that final relevant question. Too often I think sports people talk about their passion or whatever, what they give themselves over to. And that's okay, but I think we should reclaim the word in terms of Lent and Easter, the Passion of Christ, and that is, what is it that we're willing to give all of ourselves for? And that is a conversation that I've had with one-on-one with staff. It's much more difficult in a staff room in society, but I think it does come out of friendship. The deeper the friendship, the more open we are to each other to talk about what we're willing to suffer for, because we're revealing our deepest self. And again, this comes out of that that profound proposal of Lonergan. So there's our latitudes, and I shall just skip through here. I've used Lonergan's, again, the hierarchy of values, the notion of sublation, to offer the longitudes of the final relevant question. And I'm hoping you're familiar with those. So I do think that the important role of culture, as I understand it, is to mediate between the historical and the temporal, that is vital values and social values, and the gift of human dignity at personal value, and the gift of God's love that comes from beyond space and time. The proper role of culture is to conform society and our everyday living to those higher values. But shifting on to the idea now, just the image of the map, longitudes and the latitudes, what this, I think, provides is concrete questions that can be proposed in professional conversations between colleagues as friends. And these questions form a teacher who begins to open their own horizon to what is truly at stake in education, what is truly at stake in friendship, and what is truly at stake in what we can harm and how we can recover and offer healing. And so in listening closely to a colleague, you might be able to, I believe, use these questions. You can listen where they are on that map. What is the question that is concerning them at the moment? And if an answer to that question isn't appearing or revealing itself to a colleague, to ask a higher question and to share one's answer, or to go back to a question down from the bottom left for the lower levels. Maybe they've got an answer wrong there. Maybe they haven't asked that question. And once dealing with that part of the journey, then they can seek the direction and the motivation to deal with the question that they thought was the big one at the moment, in that moment. And so I believe, going with a bit of Robert Frost, that those questions set up clear choices for authenticity, clear choices for friendship, and clear choices for progress, and the school as a community that offers experiences of progress. So the teacher is to choose, have they got a choice? Are they going to live in the gaps and desire to close the gaps of their unfolding consciousness? Or are they going to be merely, in a narrow sense, self-satisfied with who they are at the moment and not meet the challenge that they might have to be someone different for their students? Do they seek the acceptance, the professional acceptance of peers and seek that company, or are they happy living in isolation? So a dialectic framing of those questions and the possible answers to that. And in maps, of course, there's longitude and latitude, but there's also altitude. And so there should be contours on that map to show that the ascension to the final relevant question is the high ground from which we can turn around and see our journey through all those other questions. And so what is the sources of democracy, authentic people power in this framing this way of education? The final relevant question of asking, is what I do truly worthwhile? And why is it truly worthwhile? Trying to seek the criteria for that deep sense of receiving the gift of oneself, and in our choices and actions, self-appropriation against the opposite of friendship, which is fear of the other. Instead of coming to know myself through the encounters, I hold everyone off at a distance, and therefore cut myself off from genuine self-knowledge. And so those questions that are mapped out with the concept of latitude, they're ascending, but also altitude, ascending, but latitude and longitude, we can find where we are. But I do think that why do we find educating worthwhile? Because in a real sense, we're cooperating with God's solution to evil. To add faith, hope, and charity to ourselves as knowers, choosers, actors, and lovers, is that our faith is the gift that perfects our knowing. It's through faith and not only in school and trusting the teacher and colleagues, but our faith in God and sharing in God's wise and loving plan perfects the knowledge that we gain through our reason. And to hope is to a source of courage and endurance that will see us continue to choose what is good, what is truly valuable, and what is real, despite the lack of any immediate practicality, any immediate gains or wins, or how we want to say it. And then in the face of every suffering and challenge, we will endure. And why do we endure? Because my acting comes out of being a friend and my responsibility of friendship in charity. And so faith, hope, and charity, being distinctions of love, are participation in the inner nature of God. And I think I mentioned this before. I know I'm running out of time, but I won't do it, but there's explanations of how this final relevant question operates and shapes what happens in any type of class, excuse me, in the curriculum. That it's not a matter of limiting it down to the RE class. The self-appropriated teacher is a constant invitation into the fullness of life for their students. And so the pedagogy that comes out of that is the two vectors of consciousness, certainly with reason, question everything and seek to know and ask every relevant question, but as friends, automatically and spontaneously love without question. And that underneath any curriculum is this ontological curriculum of the reality of the human person as a pedagogue, as a protagonist, a pedagogue, a philosopher, and passionate, desiring a reality and seeking to choose the good. The anthropological, that the person as a knower, chooser, and actor and lover is a criterion for the authenticity of any curriculum. And so that final relevant question is the fullness of cooperation with the gift not only of one's own conscious intentionality, but it's also cooperation with God's invitation to cooperate with the gift of oneself and to conform one's immediate environment, or certainly to propose to one's immediate environment, the contours of love. And that authentic people power, democracy, is understood by properly understanding the human person, and the human person aspiring to and being guided by seeking the final relevant question. So that final relevant question places all the good in society as distinctions of what is truly valuable, rather than a democracy and educational debates of seeking victory over the other, rather than seeking the good and the truth and the beauty in the other. And so through faith, hope and charity, institutions, ways of cooperating, the school itself, are opened up to the reality of that irremovable human dignity. And if that is our basis, then society is grounded in authentic people power, in an educated democracy. And so I've gone too long here, have I? Robin, I'm sorry.
You are right on time.
Right. Well, I'll just finish.
Take another
Try
minute or two if you need. Yep.
in one more minute, then. Thank you. And it's to talk about what happens in the parent-teacher interview. Okay, and the way that this can have a concrete moment in such a common occurrence in a school. And of course, so, we're teaching and learning, that upward vector. And if we frame well-being as the healing that comes with trusting with each other, there's a map of student progress, okay, to conform to that. But student decline are those things that block that progress. So inattentiveness, choosing silliness, unreasonableness, Lonergan sets these out, and a fundamental lack of trust in one's school or one's teacher or the curriculum or one's colleagues. And so that friendship there, friendship as a distinction of love, is that each part of that upward vector is to set aside all self-interest and be radically open to the other, the world as it is, to come to, to understand and judge what actually is so that the knowledge then is seen as living in a friendly universe, that this world is there to be understood, it's there to be judged, it's there to be acted in. And Lonergan says in chapter 20 of Insight, which so much of this is based upon, the decision, the commitment that we live in a friendly universe, and that would have profound impacts on our democratic institutions. And the desire to overcome those blocks to progress by, out of friendship, conforming and trusting in another. And so that the whole project of education are all, in all its different details, are all just distinctions of the one beautiful call in our faith, which is to fall in love unconditionally. And so this is the last slide that I'll go, and I'll get rid of this. So teaching and learning is falling in love with creation and coming to know the world as creation. Therefore, there's a creator. It's personal. It's a personal gift of the creator. And that objectivity, progress in teaching and learning, is guaranteed by love, because we have to set our biases aside in order to know what is real. And decline kicks in with that radical individualism that flees from love and friendship through all those distortions of our conscious intentionality. And of course, a student that is caught so much in those biases, offering them teaching and learning all the things that they've rejected, that's not going to work. It's out of the offer of friendship, that sense of well-being that comes out of a commitment to love, of sharing in God's solution to evil, is how the student will be able to overcome any of the suffering, any of the biases that this world sadly continues to throw at them at such a rate. And I've overgone that time, maybe in an attempt to cut down as much question time as possible, but I will stop sharing there. I think that's what I have to follow, is just reaffirming the idea that that committing to that final relevant question, of participating in God's solution to evil, is a way of making progress, decline, and recovery distinctions of love, of making every element of a school a distinction of love, of that total commitment to love, and therefore the school becomes a place of producing citizens that in their big and small ways will seek to conform their communities to love out of the people power that comes from knowing we are loved, and our fullness is in offering ourselves in friendship and love to each other. And I will stop there. So thank you.
Thank you, Geoff. I'll applaud you on behalf of everyone here. They're all